Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Carly Beatty to the show. I didn't ask her how to pronounce her last name. She will correct me in just a second when we get her on. Carly has had a lifelong struggle of battling her own ego while discovering what it means to be herself as an adult female. She gave me a short bio. Let's dive in and learn more about Carly and get her story. Everyone, welcome to the show. Carly. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. How are you tonight?
Doing all right. And yes, you did pronounce my last name correctly. You are one of the few over the course of the last several years who pronounced my last name correctly. And for that, I am very thankful. Thank you so much.
Good. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, as my parents say. I love it. Welcome in, everybody in chat. As many of you know, because Jay and Justice just sung me happy birthday, today is my birthday. So yay!
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be able to be here celebrating with you. We
Number
have
21, right?
What's that?
Number 21, right?
21, yes. A little over twice, but yeah. It was really fun hitting 42. And when I would get carded, sometimes it's rare. It's very rare, honestly. But when it would happen, I'd be like, yeah, twice. So that was a fun year.
Wow.
We have kind of circled around each other a bit. We've followed each other, I think, for a long time. I don't know that we'd really spoken directly before.
We really haven't, just because I've been so busy with everything that I do.
Mhm.
And I know you've been busier than the double of what you do. So we've been like two ships in a night.
Yes. So it's great to finally get you on after sort of knowing you tertiarily for a good amount of time here. Let's go ahead and just start. I don't think we had it completely in your bio. Let's go ahead and set the baseline. How do you identify and what are your pronouns?
Well, uh, well, I identify as my name, Carly, and my pronouns, I prefer she, her.
Great. Um, and we'll start off the main portion here with my favorite question. How did you choose your
Uh-oh.
name?
Wow, that's a very good question. The long and short of it now, for that, I have to actually, my middle name is Jocelyn. So I guess my first name, Carly, I I came out at work or almost 3 years, it'll be 3 years ago in August when I came out at work. And my manager at work was extremely supportive of me. And she asked me, well, she asked me how I wanted to pursue my transition. And, I just told her just have my back. And she's like, all right. A couple of months, I don't know, a week or two later, I was still under my old name, still at work. And I asked her, well, what name would what name would fit me?
Hmm.
And she said Carly. And it was the only name that over the course of the last 15, no, I'm sorry, 20 years that I haven't chosen right. Because I've been trying to choose names now for 20 years.
Huh.
And when I heard Carly, I was like, wow, that's one of the few names I never really thought of. And it stuck like glue.
Nice.
And as for my middle name, Jocelyn, my wife actually chose Jocelyn because I almost went by Jocelyn as my first name.
Mhm.
And when she, told me Jocelyn, it's like, wow, okay, that kind of works. I don't have to really, I did not change my initials, but I changed the names of the initials, and Jocelyn fit very well for a middle name for me.
Oh, that's great. I love that that story of having just a random, just someone you ask was just like, here, use this one, and you're like, yeah, I think I will.
Yes, and it worked so well. And I went through probably 5 or 6 different names in the course of the last 20 years, and none of them quite fit nearly as well as Carly.
Okay, that's awesome. You had just told us a great story about how your boss had picked your first name, your wife had suggested the middle name, and here you are, Carly Jocelyn, and I love it. So,
Thank you.
As we jump into the meat of your story, I sort of like to start at the late point when you realized that you were transgender. When did that term apply to you, as far as like your awareness of like, okay, yes, this is me?
Wow. That's a that's a really large question because I could either go back to the time when I was 3, when I knew there was something wrong with my body, or I could go back to when I was 16ish, I guess, 15, 16, when I really had an idea. That was when I had the first name that came in my mind came out. But I usually tell people I've known I was trans since I was 3 because the word transgender itself didn't exist back 20 years ago. It really didn't. I mean, in very, very small amounts it did, but not in the gigantic way it is now.
Yeah, and we always talk on this show about how the example of what we saw as transsexual, transvestite, transgender people, whatever terms they were throwing out at the time, they were not the wholesome, positive examples that we get now.
They were
So,
just, it was just different. It
yeah.
was because the terms themselves had a rapid evolution in the last 20 years.
So then, so you knew right from the start. What was your life like from then to coming out? How old were you when your egg cracked finally and you came out as trans?
Well, now see, coming out to everybody or coming out to myself, because I came out
Yourself.
to myself when I was 16.
Okay.
I knew back when I was 16 that, that this was something, but at that point that was what, 1999, 2000, not a lot of resources, not a lot of, direction, not a lot of anything, especially for a 16-year-old in a very conservative family in a very conservative town.
Hmm.
So I kept that mainly to myself. And then, like I tell people, my egg had various other cracks along the way, but the final crack was 3 years ago. Actually, 3 years ago, last week.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that milestone. That's a good
May 11th.
anniversary to hit. Yeah. So in that time in between, what was that like for you? So, for me personally, it took me a long time to kind of put the pieces together and realize that I was trans, not just like maybe someone with a fetish or whatever. You knew from an early age, and then at 16 it solidified for you, and then it wasn't until 3 years ago where you finally, you know, came out publicly and started the
Correct.
whole process. What was that time like in between there for you in those sort of two periods, in your youth and then after hitting, going through puberty and coming into your own in high school?
Well, the period between age 3 and age 16, I had saw, God, I'm going to date myself really bad. Back when I was 3, and I know you're older than me, but I'm still going to date myself. It was 1987, and that's when I realized that something was not right downstairs. And then 1989, I was in my kitchen at home, and on a black and white television, I watched Donahue. And on Donahue, he had trans people on his talk show. And I watched it and very, very focused for a while. And I kept thinking, hold on, these people sound like me. These people are getting stuff fixed. But how does this work? I was 5 years old and I was starting to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept it mostly to myself due to my family's extremely conservative upbringing of myself and their ability to just, they hated anything that wasn't them, or didn't like anything that wasn't them. They had, even my family had some reservations about one aunt being lesbian. So, they didn't like shun her or anything, but it was different.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew if I would have tried to say anything like that back in the 80s or early 90s, it would have been really bad. So I kept everything to myself. I had to.
Mm-hmm.
For my own safety. I knew I had to.
So your time there was more about keeping it in and staying safe than it was about sort of fighting against it and trying not to be that, correct?
Correct. I knew it was. I just I had to keep myself safe.
Mm-hmm. And
And
then,
then,
oh yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. And then referring to the period from age 16 to adult, um, it was not so much. It was. I kept it quiet up until I graduated high school and went into college. And then when I was in college, I was able to, I befriended some, people that over time, I befriended, and I slowly revealed to them, hey, I'm supposed to be a girl. And, some of them were kind of curious. Some of them were confused. Some of them stayed my friends. My oldest best friend I've known for 20 years this fall. And she was one of the first people I told when I was in college, because she was there with me.
Mm-hmm. So your egg, you pretty much didn't have an egg. You put an egg around yourself to kind of protect you, but you always knew. So what was it in that moment 3 years ago that was like, okay, this is something that I'm ready to do and I need to move forward on?
Well, 3 years ago, I was having a lot of depression issues, and I don't, to this day, I don't know exactly if they were or were not related to my gender dysphoria. I had tried my absolute best to, be that perfect husband, be that, that perfect person that, my family thought I could be, and my wife wanted me to be, and I thought that my son needed. I have a 4-year-old son. And one night, 3 years ago, I was laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep, and I was browsing through Snapchat. And Snapchat has a gender filter. And I tried it. And I saw a picture of me with long hair. And I just sat there and looked at it. And the first thing out of my head was, I'm not done yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I figured, I was 35, and I decided to transition. I'm like, shit, maybe I'm not too old. Maybe I'm not done yet. And I thought about it for a while and hid a lot of it from a lot of people back then, because I didn't know how I was going to pursue it. But I knew if I didn't transition, that I didn't try to lead something resembling an authentic life, that I was not going to be around for my 4-year-old. My greatest fear was for my wife to have to raise my son solo, and B, for her to try to explain to him what happened to daddy. Why don't I have a dad?
Mm-hmm.
Because I asked that same question to my mother when I was 9 years old, and I swore when my son was born that I would be a better father to him than I ever had.
So you've spent your time here staying safe and trying to be the best father you could, and then you realize that you need to come out. Was there a period for you where it was kind of hard for you to come to terms with that this was something you were actually going to do? Or was this just a moment of epiphany and freedom to be yourself, and it was kind of smooth sailing from there?
A little bit of column A and a little bit out of column B, honestly. I had an epiphany moment that I knew that I had to do this, but I also knew that I was taking a gigantic risk. I was risking my job, I was risking my wife, I was risking my family, I was risking everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that it was a risk I had to take. And a long time ago, a friend of mine, he told me, if you want to get anywhere in life, sometimes you got to take some risks. And that's one motto I've lived by my whole life, my whole adult life. And I've had a lot of success with that motto. I had some failure, but mostly success. And so it wasn't exactly easy, but I had to do it, and I had to take the risk to do it.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anybody at that time that could serve as like a role model or confidant for you to talk to and kind of get some advice? And what do I do now?
No, I had kept my ear, I wanted to transition back in 2014. I tried to transition 2009 and 14, and I kept my ear in the community since then, but I kept myself very quiet
Mm-hmm.
because I at least wanted to keep up on something resembling current events. So when I came out, I had the one or two or three people I knew, like I known for years. I'm like, yep, finally going to do it. And they're like, about damn time. Because they knew, and I knew they knew. And as for a role model, though, I didn't really have a role model except for myself. I already had in my head a plan. I had modeled a plan for 20 years on how my first year of transition was going to go. And literally, think of in some of those old buildings where they have a glass case that says in case of fire, break open for axe.
Mm-hmm.
Similar fashion, but instead of break open for an axe, you break it open. Oh, here's the master plan. You press the big button, and I just started executing the plan I'd laid in place for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So as you're moving through that, have you found that your priorities have changed, that the goals that you have in your transition have shifted?
Well, after my first year, during my first year, I acquired friends and people who'd gone through the ropes, earlier than I did. So I had, by that point, after my first year, I was like, well, okay, I did first year. What the hell am I going to do after that? So I started just winging it at that point, going, okay, well, what's my next timeline for this? What do I want to do for that? Do I really want a surgery? When do I want to do that? And how long is this going to take? I started putting long-term plans out because I didn't think I was going to get any further than the first year. After the first year, I was like, oh, well, shit, I'm going to have to literally call every Audible in the book on this one.
You mentioned in your bio battling your ego and discovering yourself, and then who you are as an adult female. What does that mean to you, that you're battling your ego? Where does that factor into this?
Well, to that ego, now that's something I've had to handle my entire adult life, regardless of gender. Everybody has an ego, and in my late teens into my early to mid 20s, I had a really big me complex. I had a really overbearing giant, like Now that I think about it, now that I'm, almost 20 years wiser, I
Mm-hmm.
think of my ego I had back then is immature and almost condescending. And most of my 20s, it was a battle of how to handle it and how to, basically get yourself knocked down a few pegs without it hurting too much. I had in when I was, God, this had to be 2009, 8, 2008, 2000, yeah, 2008. I was in a witch's coven. Something that a lot of people don't know, that I actually was a practicing witch for quite a few years. And in '08, I was in a part of a coven in the coal hills of southern Ohio, where back then you didn't get cell phone reception, you didn't get broadband internet access. You're lucky if I was surprised I didn't see the damn Pony Express flowing through, because it was like rural AF there. And I mean that quite literally. And I mean, the boil it down, the coven I was in, I later learned was more of a cult than a coven, so I got out.
Okay.
One thing they did teach me there was how to know yourself, and that you should know yourself, and how to process one's ego. And they didn't do much good for me, other than the fact that I learned what my ego is, how to handle it. Also, that that I needed to start on that back then a journey of knowing myself. And that carried over into my transition, because living my authentic life is a very basic tenet of knowing myself.
Mm-hmm.
I know myself more now, and I'm more comfortable with myself now than I ever have been in my entire life.
When you came out, who was the hardest person for you to come out to?
Um, when I came out, the hardest person, God, that's such a hard question, because it was not easy all around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, typically I would say my mother, considering she's very conservative. But then I think about my wife, who I told her this, and she had to go through her own self exploration in order to figure out if she was in love with me or in love with a man. And ends up she's actually in love with me for me, as being me, regardless of what gender I am.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, God bless her, she's 72 years old, and if she's on this earth another 10 years, I'll be highly impressed, which I doubt. But she still loves me. Doesn't quite get the name right, doesn't quite get the pronouns right, but she knows that I'm female. But it's hard for her. And I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to hound my mother, my 72-year-old mother, name and pronouns. I respect and I love my mother too much to go after her about that stuff, because in the end, it's whatever. I mean, and I look at it, after she passes, I'm still going to be called her daughter in her obituary.
Nice.
She's not going to come back from the grave and read her obituary.
No, you get to have domain over that. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the only child she had, so.
So it sounds like things have worked out with your wife to this point, and I did hear a little bit of audio from her earlier. She sounds pretty awesome. What are some of the keys that you can look back on the conversations you had and how that whole discussion went? What were some of those keys that smoothed it over and made it easier for her to learn to accept and for you to move forward together in this transition?
God, that's a really hard question.
Hmm.
Honestly, the last 3 years have been a blur. I would say that just, you know, finally coming clean and being completely honest with her helped. She ended up finding a trans spouse support group on Facebook, and it helped her for a while with it. But it, took her some time to adapt to me, because considering I was her husband for 13 years. Well, I was been her husband for, I've been with her for 13 years. I married her for, well, I was been married to her for 6 at that point. So, but after she, we've worked out a lot of differences. It's a lot of things been drugged through the mud.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped now that I feel like I have nothing to hide anymore. So it makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm able to be a better wife to her than I ever was as a husband.
Mm-hmm. How has that been for her? I probably should get her on the show and ask her directly, but you mentioned having a husband for 6 years and then now having your spouse transition and what that reflects on you as far as, what is your sexuality identity now and things like that. Were those issues that she expressed to you and that you've helped her work through?
Um, Sort of, but she worked through a lot of that herself.
Mm-hmm.
And she will be for the first to tell you, and I quote from her, that she is beyond labels.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't call herself lesbian. She doesn't call herself straight. She doesn't call herself pansexual or anything like that. She doesn't care what pronouns you use on her. She doesn't care. She is beyond the need for primitive human labels.
And do you feel like this journey that you've been on together kind of helped with that, or was she that way beforehand?
I think my transition has helped her with that, because she wasn't like that before her transition.
Did you have someone when you when you came out and started talking about it to people? Did you have anybody that supported you in a way that you weren't expecting?
I guess it took a little bit, but my mother-in-law, she, the quick, the nuts and bolts of my mother-in-law. If she, is very racist, she is quite bigoted, and she's very homophobic. But it took her a while to warm up to me being her daughter-in-law. And, I discussed this with her actually 2 weekends ago. And I told her, thank you for, adjusting to me and to accept me. And she's like, I understand. And it wasn't easy. I'm like, no. She's like, well, it wasn't easy for you either. I'm like, no, it really wasn't. So seeing my mother-in-law with her very, very closed-minded worldview, accept me, was something I didn't expect to fully happen. And her husband, who's, they're very right-wing, very conservative. He's a Navy veteran. He loves me all the same. He considers me his daughter-in-law. He doesn't care.
So you'd mentioned that, you'd been you'd had your ear to the ground in the community for a while. Did it take you a while to find community that resonated with you and actually really helped you, or was it fairly easy for you?
Well, in terms of community, to me, the term community is a bit of a misnomer to me personally, because there are people there are trans people I love to talk to. There are trans people I can't stand. Right? It really that's why I say the thought of being in the community is it's not the same, because I have friends. I have a lot of trans friends, but I also have a lot of cis friends. I have a lot of very left wing friends, and I have a lot of very right wing friends. So to me, any community is doesn't apply to me. I tend to pull my friends from all over the place, regardless of who they are or what their background is. If I think they're a good person, then they're my friend.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That means that you build a strong community wherever you are, because you're looking for the best people in any group around. And, it's really important to have that level of diversity in who we surround ourselves with, because otherwise we tend to get locked into, just kind of a corridor of thinking, and having different exposures and different ideas coming at you is really important.
I
So
completely agree.
let's get to the big ethereal question that is a good stumper for this one. What does transition look like to you? What does it mean to you on a deep level?
Ooh. Wow. All right. That's like a Socrates level question there, honey. To me, what transition is to me personally, I would not to put a finer point on it. Would just say to be able to live as your authentic self, regardless of whether you're male, female, or somewhere in between. Just to get to that point where you're comfortable with how you are personally, how you are physically, how you are emotionally, and how you are mentally, with alleviating as much dysphoria as you're able to do.
So how far along are you in that process of getting to that point of, that true self-acceptance?
Oh, hell, I'm done,
honey. That's awesome.
I like I said, I've been on hormones for 2.5 years. I had my orchiectomy back in December. As of right now, I don't see myself getting any other surgeries. I don't need facial surgery, breast augmentation, and maybe somewhere down the road. Not really in a buying for it. Don't need any other. Don't plan on getting GRS. I'm stick a fork in me. I'm done.
That's a good point to be at. I love that. Did you have any fears that you've had to deal with as you've moved along your transition?
In terms of fears, I feared how certain older the friends I had prior to transition would react to me, because I had a lot of male friends. I was actually a Freemason, and technically still am a Freemason. I was an active Freemason from 2012 through the latter part of 2018. And, a lot of the brethren I still talk to several of them, but a lot of them I don't talk to anymore, because they have a very, very closed-minded view of, at least in Ohio, they have a very closed-minded view of what can and cannot be accepted as a Mason. Even though the United Grand Lodge of England, which is one of the largest Masonic bodies in the world, has said that you can be a Mason as a transgender woman if you had gotten your last degree before you transitioned, which I was already done before I transitioned. So the United Grand Lodge of England said this, and the Grand Lodge of Ohio, which is the jurisdiction I fall under, they haven't said anything about it, because I don't think they care. Because they're like, well, this is Ohio, this isn't England. We're going to do it this way. because that's what the Grand Lodge of Ohio has always done.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That's them. When some in India and someday they're like the fraternity itself. It's literally killing itself. When I left back in 2018, there were less than 90,000 Masons in the state of Ohio, whereas 40 years ago there were several 100,000. And we had tabulated at the death rate, because the average age of a Mason in Ohio was like 65. So we did the math. We expected basically all of Masonry in Ohio to die out by 2030 or 2040. I can't remember right offhand.
Wow. They're not doing a
It's
good job of
because,
recruiting new members,
well, it's just
apparently.
because the mortality rate is so high because they're all older than dirt.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, it sounds like the recruiting for younger members is not going so well.
No, because younger members like my age, when I was 27 when I got in, and the recruitment's going so poorly because the fraternity is being very selective, and granted, some of the requirements are there for a very specific reason. I completely agree with most of them, but in order, like if the Masons would incorporate people regardless of gender, it would help.
Mm-hmm.
But the Grand Lodge of Ohio still has a very, very closed-minded view of what makes a Mason, and it will be their own undoing, unfortunately. And that's it's terrifying for me to even think that.
So back to your story, what forms of dysphoria have you struggled with throughout your transition?
Oh gosh, where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
Beginning my transition, when I went full time. All right, August of 19. When I went full time, my hair was this long. When I went full time, I said no wigs, no breast forms. That was my vow to myself.
Okay.
And so I had hair dysphoria. I was full time 4 months before I started hormones. I I had some body dysphoria, definitely. Was that 5 months after I started? 5 months after I went full time is when I started laser on my face. So that took time.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 months later, COVID started. So everything was closed down for a matter of months. So I had more dysphoria. And it took the first year was very dysphoric, but I trudged through it because it's the ugly duckling stage, as I like to call it, and we all have to get through it.
Yeah. Yep. Even the
It's
best of
it's
us.
literally it, and especially if you're a trans girl in her, like, I was 35 when I started. So I've already went through more than went through male puberty, and I, like, prior to transition, I ran a lot to deal with the dysphoria, to deal with the depression, to deal with the anxiety. I had already done, God, I've done 8 half marathons, a full marathon, an ultra marathon, more 5 and 10Ks than I can count. I got a whole wall full of medals in my living room, all done before I started. All right. And I, I can show you later. I'll show you pictures of myself prior to transition. I look like I should have modeled for freaking either Hollister or Abercrombie. Like, I was cut, and I look, for a man, I look fucking gorgeous. And I I guess that, seeing my body change shape was so weird because I knew I wanted a female figure, and every female has a completely different figure.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while to, it was weird seeing my hard cut body change into a female body. It was so surreal seeing it that it took some time to get used to. But now that I've been through what I would call the ringer, and I've come out in one piece, that I'm is my body super muscle like it was? No. Will it ever be again? Probably not. But am I happy with what it looks like? More or less.
Hmm. Is there anything you feel you've accomplished? Sorry, dogs going nuts in the background. Is there anything you feel you've been able to accomplish because of your transition?
Anything I've been able to accomplish? Wow, that's a good question. You got a lot of stumpers, girl. I
But yeah, I
guess
said I wasn't going to grill you, but I've got some good ones for
no,
you.
that's fine. I can handle it. I'm a big girl. I can take it. I guess my thing is that, like, I briefly, back last year, from basically January to July of 21, I was a model for a very, very, very small clothing company in Canada. And that was only a 6-month contract. And then I was off for 6 months with that and didn't do anything, partially because I was just dealing with a lot of other stuff. And then actually just tonight, a few hours ago, I signed a contract with a private photographer here locally to be a model for them.
Wow.
So now I'm doing my second stint as a model.
And that's funny because you were just talking about how cut and perfect you were before transitioning. I love that.
Exactly.
What is your favorite thing that you've learned through your journey?
Favorite thing that I've learned? God. To do, or this I've learned in general?
Yeah, I like to say, what is your favorite thing that you've learned about either yourself or the outside world around you? Life in general.
Wow. Well, I don't know if it's something I've learned, but something I've been told, and it's a phrase that holds true. And this goes back to, I said earlier I didn't really have a role model or a mentor. I didn't have one right in the beginning. I had one, sorted down a few months in after I had went full time, and her name is Maddie. And Maddie told me, because she was 2.5 years in when I first started, and she told me, you know, trust the process, let it work. And I'm so incredibly stubborn. I'm so incredibly impatient. I'm the most impatient person you'll probably ever meet. And it took me a while to realize that that was something I had to learn, was patience, to trust the process of everything,
Mm-hmm.
and to let it just simmer and let it go and let it work. And that was something I never really had the ability to learn to do before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. I like to say that the key to transition is patience, because patience about how your friends and family will react, about how the hormones will treat you, your own kind of mental acceptance of everything. There's a lot of patience that's involved in transitioning and, being successful at it, feeling like, you've become the person that you were meant to be and that you can live that fully and happily. As we
Definitely.
as we wrap this up, What advice do you have for younger closeted trans folks out there?
Well, wow. Don't give up. If you're, and I'm just gonna shoot this out there. If you're, a 15 or 16-year-old, and you just, last week found out you're transgender, or you figured it out, and you're trying to put the pieces together, and let's say you're in a household that's not as welcoming and accepting as you'd like them to be, you need to hang tough and you need to persevere, because sooner or later you will be 18. Sooner or later you will be out the door. Sooner or later you will be on your own. And, if you feel comfortable coming out to your parents now, that's fine. Do it. If you don't, be careful, because especially now with everything that's going on in especially America, with it seems like every southern state trying to go freaking draconian on laws, that the ones that are so much about personal freedom, except for when it's something they don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not gonna name names or do a political tirade, because that's not my style. But if you're in a state, or if you're in a place that it's not safe to come out in, just hold tight. You're going to be an adult soon. If you're not already 18, you will be soon. It will come. And then make your moves. And 18 is not too old to transition. I did it at age 35, and I turned out pretty darn good myself.
Hell, 40 isn't too late to transition. Let's just say that too. And I know people who've transitioned even later. So there you go. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing that advice, Carly, and for being willing to share your story with us.
Yeah. Thank you.